But I want to start out with Hunter Biden and Jared Kushner. As you probably know, unless you've been living under a rock, Hunter Biden got a special prosecutor last week. Now, he has pled guilty to not having paid his income taxes for 2 years. He has since caught up and paid all the fines. And he pled guilty to applying for a gun license, a concealed carry permit, and checking the box that said, I am not addicted to drugs, when he was, in fact, addicted to drugs. Neither of these are crimes for which typically there is any jail. Usually both of these crimes, in fact, the tax one, more often than not, there's a small fine. The gun one, more often than not, nothing happens at all. But the Republicans want him to go to prison for these things, and now they've got a special prosecutor. And the reason why they want him to go to prison is not because of the gun charge and the tax charge, because they acknowledge those are minor offenses. They're saying they want him to go to prison because he profited off his father being vice president during the Obama administration. And the way he profited off that was by bragging about being the son of the vice president and getting his dad on the phone when he was working in Ukraine for Burisma. So, okay. They're saying Hunter made millions of dollars doing this. Let's assume that's all true. Now, first off, there's no actual evidence that any of that is true. I mean, yes, he was working for Burisma and he made money, and yes, he did call his dad, but there's no evidence that Joe Biden intervened in any way whatsoever. And in fact, the one close to an intervention that Joe Biden did, which is where he fired the prosecutor who was looking into Burisma, he fired that guy because the guy was taking bribes from Burisma and was slow-walking the investigation, and he got replaced with a guy who actually did an investigation. So, I mean, the one thing that Joe Biden did was actually anti-corruption. Don't tell any Republicans that, their heads will explode, but anyhow. So the case that I'm building in this op-ed is 5 steps. Number one, that Jared Kushner leveraged his White House position to get a bailout for his terrible 666 Fifth Avenue investment. This could be a violation of federal law. Number two, that Kushner traded top secret documents or information from the White House to help Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, take over Saudi Arabia and to excuse his murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and that Jared was paid $2 billion for his efforts. If true, this is a violation of federal law. Number three, that both Putin and MBS want Trump back in office so that Trump can end American democracy and make life easier for autocrats like them. And to that end, just a few weeks ago, they engineered a huge cut in oil production, which will show up at higher prices at the pump this fall and throughout next year. Number four, also to that end, Russia engineered the Hunter laptop scandal, which Republicans are now running with, like Benghazi, to try to tear down Joe Biden. And finally, also to that end of ending democracy in America, Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing Gulf dictatorships with aligned interests are financing the Trump family and thus the Trump campaign via the Live Golf Tournament and Trump's new billion-dollar real estate deal in Oman. So let's just go through this stuff, pretty straightforward. In early 2018, Jared Kushner needed about $1 billion or his life was going to go down in flames, his whole entire life. Back when his dad, Chuck Kushner, a professional con man, went to prison in 2005, a friend of the family who was a PR professional gave Jared some sage advice. This is a quote from Ben Walsh for Huffington Post. The fellow said, quote, "Step one, buy a New York newspaper. Don't be too particular. Any newspaper will do. Step two, buy a big Manhattan building. Any building will do. Step three, marry the daughter of a rich New York family. Anyone will do." Jared, now that was in 2005. In 2006, Jared purchased the New York Observer, a New York newspaper, for about $10 million. The next year, in 2007, early 2007, he bought 666 Fifth Avenue, and he paid a whopping $1.8 billion for it, showing that he knew nothing about Manhattan real estate. It was worth about half that. And then, in 2008, he hooked up, now that he was a serious guy owning a newspaper and a big building, he hooked up with Ivanka Trump and married her in 2008 and married her in 2009. So, you know, he followed his father's friend's advice to the T. But by the time Trump ended up in the White House, this note on 666 Fifth Avenue was coming due, and Jared was panicking. I mean, the value of the building was appraised in 2010 at $820 million. Keep in mind, he paid $1.8 billion for it. No European bank, no American bank, not even Deutsche Bank would go near this thing. So Jared was reduced to begging from billionaires outside the United States. So he spent 2 long years, pretty much all of 2015 and 2016, with he and his father desperately negotiating with Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, also known as HBJ, who was the former prime minister of Qatar, and at that time ran Qatar's $250 billion sovereign wealth fund. Finally, when Trump got elected in November of 2016, in December of 2016, Jared Kushner invited HBJ to the White House, or excuse me, to Trump Tower during the transition period, and asked him again for $1 billion. HBJ said, we won't give you $1 billion, but we'll give you $500 million if you can get another $500 million from somebody else. Jared, it turned out, was not able to get $500 million from someplace else, so the deal fell through, and Jared didn't have any money, and again, he was looking at losing his $1.8 billion building and being completely bankrupted. So on May 20th, 2017, Jared Kushner had a secret private meeting with the leaders of Saudi Arabia. 3 weeks later, on June 5th, 2017, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt cut diplomatic relations with Qatar and blockaded that country to prevent the Qataris from getting food and other, essential supplies. Rex Tillerson was Secretary of State. He went nuts. He was like, holy crap, the Fifth Fleet, which patrols the Persian Gulf, is based out of Qatar. And suddenly Qatar doesn't have any food? Tillerson tried to end this, but then Donald Trump came out and said, yes, I support the blockade. Qatar went to NBC News and said, we believe this is a reprisal for our refusing to give $1 billion to Jared Kushner. Finally, a year later in 2018, Qatar gave in, and they backstopped 2 real estate deals for Jared Kushner. They gave him $184 million. They actually did this through U.S. proxies, but they gave him $184 million in May to refinance a Chicago building he had, and in August they gave him $1 billion to refinance 666 Fifth Avenue through a Canadian investment company. So, point number 1. Kushner using U.S. foreign policy to get $1 billion. Number 2, Kushner apparently gave Saudi Arabia's MBS top secret information from the White House that helped MBS overthrow Mohammed bin Nayef, who was actually the leader of Saudi Arabia at the time in 2017. This young prince, and Nayef was in his 50s. He was 54 years old. At the time, Mohammed bin Salman was 33 years old, same age as Jared Kushner. And as the Jerusalem Post reported, quote, Kushner and the Crown Prince had a late October 2017 meeting in Riyadh. A week later, Mohammed began what he called an anti-corruption crackdown. The Saudi government arrested and jailed dozens of members of the Saudi royal family in a Riyadh hotel, among them Saudi figures named in a daily classified brief read by the president and his closest advisors that Kushner read avidly. According to the report, Mohammed told confidants that he and Kushner discussed Saudis identified in that brief, that classified presidential daily brief, as disloyal to Mohammed. In other words, Kushner took the presidential daily brief, which was top secret and he wasn't supposed to have, over to Saudi Arabia and gave it to MBS, who used it to imprison and even kill his political opponents and seize control of the country. Now, it appears that for this, Jared Kushner was given $2 billion. Jared Kushner apparently gave Mohammed bin Salman top secret presidential daily briefs that MBS then used to imprison and murder his political enemies inside Saudi Arabia and consolidate his power. Number 3, both Putin and MBS want Trump back in office. Putin wants him back in office because it'll help him win the war in Ukraine. Trump will stop the war in Ukraine. MBS wants Trump back in office because, you know, he had a good relationship with Trump in the United States, and now he's kind of on the outs with us. And he's the world's biggest purveyor of fossil fuels, which are melting down the planet. So what did they do? Well, Saudi Arabia and Russia got together last month and announced a $2 million a day cut in oil production. Now, keep in mind, world production is only about 80 million barrels a day. So 2 million barrels a day is substantial. It's not going to have an immediately huge impact, but over the course of the next year, it's going to inch gas prices up to around $5.50 a gallon by the time the 2024 election rolls around. We saw this, you know, exact same thing happen back in 2016 when the Saudis cut oil to try to hurt Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. So you got that. Then number 4, to help Trump back in office, Russian intelligence put together the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. Marcy Wheeler over at emptywheel.net has dug through the contents of Hunter's laptop that Republicans have published. And it's pretty obvious what happened here. And there's, you know, open record reporting that, first of all, Hunter, when he was deep into drugs and alcohol, was using a Russian escort service to have sex with hookers. Those hookers would come to his apartment, have sex with him. He would sometimes get so drunk he would pass out. And apparently one of them had access to his computer or his phone because a Russian email address hacked his iCloud account. They then cloned his computer's backup, which was on iCloud, onto a new used laptop and dropped that off with this blind computer repairman who just happened to be buddies with Rudy Giuliani. This is a classic Russian disinformation campaign. President Biden has called it a Russian disinformation campaign. 50 U.S. intelligence officers have signed a letter calling this a Russian intelligence disinformation campaign. But the Republicans are running with it anyway. So it's just incredible. So, you know, there you go. This is what I'm seeing. What are you seeing in addition to this? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of the break.